There it is. It is time. Time for the Royal Ramble, and time once again to talk about pro wrestling and mixed martial arts. I'm your host, Blaine the Brain, and there is a lot to cover this week. You heard it right there, the famous words of one Bruce Buffer, which echoed throughout the Toyota Center in Houston last night. They say that everything is bigger in Texas, and the UFC certainly did not disappoint with its latest pay-per-view offering. Being that it's the freshest thing in people's minds, well, at least it should, I'll kick this bad boy off with a recap of that very event. For the non-MMA fans out there, shame on you. Oh, I'm only joking. I'll wrap things up as fast as I can because later on in this program, I will be talking non-stop WWE as I preview both the Vengeance Day and Elimination Chamber cards this week in detail and also attempt to predict both Stand and Deliver and WrestleMania cards, so stay tuned. If I can't finish this UFC recap in 5 minutes, just wait longer. I kid. So let's get things started, shall we? The first thing I noticed last night, of course, was no Joe Rogan. I mean, I guess it shouldn't be that surprising considering the recent controversy, although I understand there was a scheduling conflict that may have been the real reason, but his voice was still noticeably absent and replaced by former middleweight champion and Ultimate Fighter winner Michael Bisping, who I thought did a pretty good job. There was a lot of eye-poking going on in the opening round of the first fight, but Bobby Green really bloodied up the face of his opponent, Nasrat Haqparast, which earned him a unanimous decision victory. Renato Moicano was able to take down Alexander Hernandez in the second round of their fight and secure a rear-naked choke for the submission victory. Derek Brunson almost did the same to his opponent, Jared Cannonier, who ended up being saved by the buzzer to close out round one, and then Cannonier came back in the second round with rapid-fire elbows to get the TKO. Quite the comeback there. And then the big boys took center stage for a heavyweight classic between Derek Lewis and Tai Tuivasa. You just knew this one wasn't going all 3 rounds. Lewis landed some pretty heavy shots in the first round, but it was Tuivasa scoring the Hail Mary elbow strike out of nowhere, which floored Lewis and earned Tuivasa the knockout victory. I think it's safe to say that Tuivasa might have punched his ticket into heavyweight title contention. Francis Ngannou beware. And then, of course, it was the much-anticipated rematch between Israel Adesanya and Robert Whittaker for middleweight gold. It seemed to me that both guys were fighting pretty cautiously in the early going, which is not all that surprising, as they both have suffered very devastating losses in recent years. Whittaker against Adesanya in their last fight in 2019, and then Adesanya losing in his quest to become a double champion against Jan Blachowicz. That notwithstanding, they definitely turned up the volume in later rounds. Whittaker almost secured a rear-naked choke on the champ. He had both hooks in, but Adesanya was either able to wiggle free or Whittaker simply gave up the hold. I couldn't quite tell from my vantage point. It seemed as though Whittaker displayed more offense, but Adesanya may have done more damage, and so he ended up keeping the title via unanimous decision. He did seem to call out Jared Cannonier in his post-fight interview with DC, and that's a fight I'd like to see too, but I wouldn't mind seeing a third fight between these two either. Unfortunately, that's the champion's advantage, that if you leave it to the judges, more often than not, they favor the champ. But a pretty good night of fights overall. So that was last night, but as former UFC announcer Mike Goldberg used to say, coming up next. The WWE has 2 huge nights of programs, which will kick off Tuesday night with the NXT 2.0 Vengeance Day event, so I'll start there. It's a little strange this year that they've opted to present this special in the regular NXT time slot, as last year and I believe the year before, these were presented as WWE Network specials. Having said that, it is the new 2.0 era, so I guess it's understandable, but they did do the War Games event as a network special just 2 months ago. Just saying. I must say that even though I do criticize WWE a lot, their in-ring product is still usually pretty great, and I appreciate the effort that they put forth in stacking the deck for both the Vengeance Day and Elimination Chamber cards. But they've also made a decent effort in building them, making each match seem important, so good on the company for that. One of the matches at Vengeance Day will be Pete Dunne against Tony D'Angelo. Gotta say, I'm a fan of the D'Angelo character, but it seems to have cooled off a bit since War Games. These guys have traded wins back and forth, and I'm not so much a fan of the 50-50 booking, but it does make sense that the rubber match would require a stipulation. It's also appropriate that, as brought up on television this week, they're going to be competing in the same environment as they did when their feud first started, which is a steel cage. That's fine, but I'm a little old school, and in my mind, a cage serves two purposes. The first is to either keep people from interfering and also to keep the combatants confined, but the second is to act as a weapon itself. So why they added the unnecessary stipulation that this will now be a weaponized cage match is beyond me. To me, it just takes away from the original stip. I've never been much a fan of these stip within a stip matches, as it defeats the whole purpose and it just becomes a hardcore match that just happens to be inside a cage, but the actual cage structure is insignificant. I've heard that Dunn has been having dark matches on the main roster, so I'm assuming that this will be his swan song in NXT, and therefore I think D'Angelo is winning this one, and probably clean. If he's the guy sticking around, you want him to look as strong as possible coming out of it, and possibly position himself as a potential contender for Braun Breaker later on. Also on this card is the match for the women's tag team titles. It'll be defending champions Toxic Attraction turning back the challenge of Indy Hartwell and Persia Pirotta. It's interesting that they decided to go with this match on the bigger show, but kept the Kaylee Ray vs. Mandy Rose match on last week's regular edition of NXT, as I think it should have been in reverse order. But perhaps they needed to switch the matches around due to time constraints on this show, which I guess would make sense. This is probably the match that I'm least looking forward to. I haven't really been all that impressive with any of these four in the ring, nor have their characters impressed me. If I can be honest here, I think this will be a train wreck, but hopefully they keep it short. I'm also not a fan of makeshift teams. Anytime you have a team without a name, you know that a breakup is in their future. It's inevitable. I mean, most teams in WWE end up breaking up anyway, but not even coming up with a team name is basically dotting that exclamation point. That said, I can totally see a turn coming here where Persia refuses to tag and leaves Indy having to deal with two opponents. They eventually get the best of her and retain their titles. They could always go the route of Persia being jealous of Indy's relationship with Dexter Lumis, or claiming that it's getting in the way, no pun intended, of their tag team success. Then you have the finals of the men's Dusty Cup with defending champions MSK against the Creed brothers of the Diamond Mine. I'm still confused as to whether the Creeds are supposed to be babyfaces or heels, but I suppose in the modern era of pro wrestling it really doesn't matter. There are always going to be blurry lines. This should be a great match, but probably not up to par with some of MSK's previous matches. The Creeds are still a little green in my opinion, but this will probably be their best match to date. Now, given that we are in the 2.0 era and MSK are remnants of the old black and gold, I would think the Creed brothers need to go over here. I'm expecting a very competitive match, but I think the Creeds will pull this one out with a clean win, and then MSK will be moved up to the main roster to receive further guidance from their mentor Riddle. It's interesting though that spot was originally meant for Jeff Hardy, but his abrupt release changed those plans. The North American title is also being defended next week, with Carmelo Hayes squaring off against Cameron Grimes. Of all the titles being defended on this show, I think this is the one to change hands, and I'm thinking this will probably open the show. Grimes is a very hot act in the company, and you want to keep that momentum going. His look reminds me a lot of Jervis Tetch for all you Batman fans out there, and he's packed with charisma. I think Hayes can afford a loss here, as he's had a pretty strong run thus far, and I think a mistake from Trick Williams will end up costing him the title, so I'm predicting a new champion in this one. It was also announced this week that a face-to-face will happen between LA Knight and Grayson Waller next week. It won't be a match, but it's been advertised as a non-wrestling segment, so I'm expecting some kind of angle here to build to a match the following week or something. It's so frustrating because Waller has a lot of potential, and they were doing a great job of building him up until the clean loss to AJ Styles, and then the post-match angle with Knight, which effectively killed his momentum. And on top of that, I don't buy Knight as a babyface. He's great and all, don't get me wrong. He's very charismatic and his promos are some of the best in the company, but his whole persona and character seems to be designed for a heel, and he just isn't believable in the babyface role to me. And then rounding out the card is the big one for the NXT Championship, featuring Braun Breaker with 2 Ks defending against Santos Escobar. This should be a fine match, but I have to say that the overbooked contract signing segment last week did Escobar no favors, and I'd say he has an even lesser chance of winning any title here. In fact, given how that segment went, I don't expect him to ever win any world title. I hope it's at least a competitive match so they can let Escobar shine in some spots, but I would not expect a new champion here. I picked Braun to win, and pretty decisively, making him look good for his next challenger. So speaking of what's next, that's $1 million question. We know that the Stand and Deliver event is next on the calendar, but a date hasn't yet been confirmed, and it also has yet to be confirmed if this will be one night or two like last year. Latest I heard is that the show will air the afternoon of the first night of WrestleMania, which I can't imagine would be a good idea. But let's talk about the potential card. Firstly, we know that Braun Breaker is going to be one half of the title match. I think the thing with Dolph Ziggler this week was just a bump in the road until we get there, and I'm expecting that match to take place on regular TV, which could happen as early as a week after Vengeance Day. Breaker is now 1-1 in his series of matches with Tommaso Ciampa, which does open the door for a rubber match, and I'm guessing that will be the main event of Stand and Deliver with some added stipulation, possibly last man standing. I'll take it a step further and predict that Ciampa will be going full-blown heel in the coming weeks to set that up. With Cameron Grimes winning the North American title as I predicted, he'll also need a challenger for Stand and Deliver. There is a lot of unfinished business, and you can book him against any number of people. I think Tony D'Angelo is someone to consider, as Grimes beat him to earn the title shot in the first place. And then I believe Carmelo Hayes will also be demanding a rematch, as will Duke Hudson, still embarrassed after losing his hair to Grimes in December. Roderick Strong could also be added to the mix, as he just unified the Cruiserweight title in a match with Hayes. And then you have Pete Dunne, who's been embroiled in this heated rivalry with D'Angelo. So I'm predicting a 6-way scramble match with everyone I just mentioned. You could even make it an elimination match to add a little more intrigue. I also predicted earlier that Indy Hartwell and Persia Pirotta will be broken up at Vengeance Day, so those two can go at it one-on-one, I suppose, but probably on the kickoff depending on time restrictions. As the rivalry between Grayson Waller and LA Knight continues to escalate over the next couple of weeks, the numbers game will eventually get the best of Knight, as he's constantly beaten down by Waller and his associate Sanga. Waller then challenges Knight to find a partner for a tag match at Stand and Deliver, and that partner is none other than a returning Johnny Gargano. I've heard rumors that Gargano could be All Elite shortly, which he still might be, but I wouldn't completely rule out this possibility. And then, of course, the NXT Tag Title match should be easy, as the Creed brothers who just won the Dusty Cup will likely get Imperium at that event. The Women's Dusty Cup finals will probably also take place at Stand and Deliver, because realistically, where else? Given how things have been going, I'm anticipating a final match involving the teams of Raquel Gonzalez and Cora Jade against the team of Io Shirai and Kaylee Ray. Two makeshift teams here, but could be interesting to see these former War Games teammates go at it. The women's singles belt will probably also be defended, but it's honestly hard to choose a challenger here, as no one really stands out. Sarai has picked up some wins lately, so it could be her challenging Mandy Rose, but I wouldn't mind seeing anybody in this spot as long as it's not Wendy Chu. So that wraps up the NXT discussion, I think. It should be an interesting month or so to see how things develop, and if any of these predictions actually come true. Moving on, let's talk a little about WWE main roster programming, starting with the next premium live event. It'll be Elimination Chamber, airing Saturday afternoon from the Jeddah Superdome in Saudi Arabia. Before I discuss the booking of the Chamber matches, let's talk about some of the undercard first. Just added on the SmackDown side last week is the highly anticipated rematch between Drew McIntyre and Madcap Moss. I know that one will put a lot of butts in the seats. Seriously though, why is this happening? Who did Drew McIntyre piss off? This guy should be much higher up the card, and this is nothing more than an embarrassment. Besides that, McIntyre beat Moss at day one. Even after the injury angle, Drew returned to eliminate both Moss and Corbin at the Rumble, and then claymored Moss again on TV. What else is there left to do? The story is done. The heel got his comeuppance. I truly hope that they are not building towards a McIntyre vs. Corbin match at WrestleMania, but it seems to be headed that way. And I have no idea what Vince's obsession is with Baron Corbin. I'm picking McIntyre to win this one in 30 seconds. Entrance, Claymore, done. Let's move on. We also have the SmackDown Tag Team titles being defended, with the Usos squaring off against the Viking Raiders. I think this should be a good match, and it's great to see a tag team match between two actual teams, and not just a team consisting of strange bedfellows. I can't see a title change here given the minimal build and the Uso association with Roman Reigns, but I don't see a clean finish here either. I think we may actually get a DQ so the Raiders can lay claim to a rematch. The Usos hit their splash, but one of the Raiders kicks out, and then they get intentionally DQ'd after using a chair or something, leading to a rematch probably on SmackDown. Then we get the women's tag match also added on SmackDown this week, featuring SmackDown Women's Champion Charlotte Flair teaming with Sonya Deville against Ronda Rousey and Naomi. I don't know why they felt the need to add this, but it should be an okay match. I just don't want to see Charlotte or Rousey get too physical with each other before their big match at Mania, as that would remove any kind of intrigue for that match. I'm thinking the heels should go over, and Naomi will be eating the pin here, but Sonya will find a way out and somehow replace herself in the match. Maybe she'll have a doctor's note or something, and then place Shayna Baszler in this match as her replacement. It'll be interesting to see how Shayna and Ronda would interact with each other being on opposing teams, but it could add a new dynamic to the match and perhaps tease something with those two later on. Sonya, even though removed from the match, will involve herself at the end, leading to Naomi being distracted and getting choked out by Shayna. Meanwhile, as Rousey is tending to a fallen Naomi, Charlotte takes a cheap shot with a running boot to Rousey's face, causing Rousey to snap and start attacking some of the officials, attempting to get to Charlotte, which leads to her suspension until the weeks leading into Mania. So now let's talk about the booking of the two chamber matches. You have the women's chamber match to determine a number one contender to Becky's title on the Raw side, featuring Doudrop, Liv Morgan, Rhea Ripley, Nikki ASH, Bianca Belair, and a mystery opponent. My two questions heading into this one are, firstly, why is Liv in this match when all she ever does is lose? I think the last match she actually won was the 5-way like 2 months ago to get a match with Becky, so why does she keep receiving potential title opportunities? But the biggest question heading into this one is who will be the mystery participant? It's anyone's guess, but I've heard various names thrown around, and you'd think the fact that they're keeping this a mystery might suggest someone huge that will eventually be Becky's Mania program, because, let's face it, she desperately needs one at this point. And not just an opponent, but an opponent that will be of higher value than Lita. So who is that? Trish Stratus, maybe? I've heard Trish is hosting Canada's Got Talent soon, so that may rule her out. But could she wrap up the feud with Becky and then go off to do what she's got to do? I think not. I don't know if there will be time for that, nor if her contract will allow it. So who does that leave? You know Miss Bliss is still absent from this match. I unfortunately can't say her full name or my Echo Dot will start going crazy, but I don't know if her being a mystery will be anything special. I mean, she's on the roster already, so where's the surprise? So here's what I'm picturing. Doudrop, Liv, Rhea, and Nikki all enter the chamber. Bianca is out 5th, so she'll start the match, but as she is making her entrance, she is assaulted from behind by a hooded figure with a foreign object, or international object as they're now called. The figure removes her hood, and it's the returning Bayley, who, if you remember, was feuding with Bianca before she got injured, so it makes perfect sense that she'd be out for revenge. Bayley enters the chamber as the mystery participant, and Bianca's injuries allow Bayley to pick up the easy win, so Bianca is the first one eliminated. In the end, it comes down to Bayley and Rhea. They have one of those epic final encounters, and as Bayley attempts her bulldog finisher, Rhea counters into the Riptide to win the match and become number one contender. I'll explain a little further in my Mania prediction, so stay tuned. The men's chamber match is a lot tougher to predict, but I think outside of Lashley retaining or Brock winning, there isn't really a huge chance that anyone else is walking away as WWE champion. I can see the first two in being Seth Rollins and Riddle. This should be a really good in-ring match, I think, given who's involved. I was thinking of KO interfering, leading to Rollins' elimination, but I don't believe KO will be in Saudi, so I'm not sure if that will happen. But regardless, Rollins in theory will be the first two out, I'm guessing, and then after a great sequence between Styles and Riddle, Riddle gets the victory, countering a Styles clash into a roll-up for the elimination. Brock then gets in and starts destroying both Riddle and Lashley with German suplexes until the Usos run down, but Brock sees them coming and presses Riddle right into the cage to knock them off the platform. As all the referees run to check on Riddle, Lashley applies the Hurt Lock on Brock, but is frustrated because Lesnar is fading, but there's no ref in sight to verify the submission, causing Lashley to release the submission and pull the ref in to complain, only to walk right into an F5 and Lesnar pins the champion. I think this way you can make an easy argument for Lashley to get a rematch at some point. It's down now to Lesnar and Riddle, and Riddle puts up a bit of a fight but is eventually dropped with an F5 followed by an immediate second one for the win, and Lesnar is the WWE Champion. Honestly, I don't believe they would have teased the title for title idea if they had no intention of following through with it, so I think that's exactly what we're getting at Mania. As for the 2 title matches, I wouldn't expect a title change in either one of them. I think this is the last we see of either Lita or Goldberg, at least until SummerSlam. And I think both champs retain clean to keep them both strong heading into the biggest show of the year. So that brings us to the WrestleMania card. A couple of the matches have already started building, and some are even official at this point, so some of these match choices may not be as surprising. We're definitely getting Reigns versus Lesnar in a champion versus champion title for title match probably on night 2. But wait, if they're doing that for the men's title, shouldn't they also do the same for the women's title? I mean, WWE usually does follow the pattern of having 2 of everything, so why not? I mentioned Rhea Ripley winning the women's chamber match earlier, but what does that mean? Well, obviously she's in the match with Becky for the Raw title. I'm all for it, and it's a fresh match and should be a good one. But it's not a match that I'd call WrestleMania worthy. So how about we add something else to the match? What if on night 1 we have Becky versus Rhea and Ronda versus Charlotte, and on night 2, you have the 2 winners face off in a title for title match as well. Let's be real here, Becky versus Ronda is the money match that everyone wants to see. I know they're teasing it for next year, but who knows what could happen between now and then. Also, we know the history between Charlotte and both Becky and Rhea, so that is something as well. Ronda and Rhea have never faced each other either, although that's the one combination between the 4 that I'm not expecting. Not at Mania anyway. But even though no one's expecting Rhea to win, you at least build her up by putting her into the same conversation as the top 3 women's wrestlers in the world. That would be huge. But what about the other women? Honestly, I think we may get more women's matches this year than just those title matches, especially with so much talent on both rosters. The feud between Sonya and Naomi has been building, and I think that will culminate at Mania with a stipulation, like if Sonya loses, she's no longer in power, but Naomi's career is on the line. Obviously, they never stick to these things, but it seems like a match worthy of a WrestleMania. You also have the thing with Bayley and Bianca, which I addressed earlier in the Chamber preview, so I can picture those 2 in either a regular one-on-one match or even hair versus hair to end their feud. Drew McIntyre really seems like the odd man out, as I pointed out earlier, and that really needs to change. They've clearly been teasing something between him and Corbin, and I truly hope that WrestleMania is not the final destination for those 2. It's just not a match that screams WrestleMania to me. I think we may get some interpromotional matches this year because honestly, who even cares about the draft at this point? They clearly don't. So I don't think it's out of the question to revisit the rivalry between Drew and Lashley, and I would do just that. They're both still pretty big names and I think of equal value, and Drew never got his win back, so why not? You also have the inevitable celebrity match at Mania, and it's pretty obvious at this point that it's going to be something involving Johnny Knoxville and Sami Zayn. Now, I would prefer it if it were Zayn getting his Intercontinental title match versus Shinsuke Nakamura with Knoxville and the Jackass crew in Nakamura's corner, but it seems like that match is happening on SmackDown. That's not to say that they won't do a rematch at Mania, but I think it's more likely that it'll be a tag match or Zayn versus Knoxville one-on-one. I also wouldn't rule out doing just a segment between the 2, perhaps some kind of Jackass competition. I think that would probably be more entertaining than any match between the 2, and it would be more believable that Zayn could lose. I would imagine there also has to be a big match in line for Edge, and looking at the roster and based on the recent rumors I've heard, it seems like Edge versus AJ Styles might be the money match. It's probably the biggest match you're going to make with either one of these guys, and I'd be fully on board for that one. I also appreciate the fact that they've been building AJ up lately with a series of clean wins. Funny, because since the loss to Omos, which I did not intend to rhyme by the way, you'd think Omos would be the guy being pushed, but he's rarely been seen since, and AJ has been ascending up the card as he should be. It really just makes that loss kind of pointless now when you think about it. The tag title scene has kind of been shaping up lately. They have a decent number of teams on each show now, and I've been most impressed with Alpha Academy as Chad Gable has been one of the standouts since the draft back in October. That said, I don't anticipate the Academy holding those belts until Mania, and I suspect that they will be dropping them any day now back to RK Bro, who will end up defending and probably losing the belts to the team of Seth Rollins and Kevin Owens. Even though WWE loves to break tag teams up, I think it would be too premature for KO and Rollins since they aren't even really a team yet. And RK Bro has been on fire and are too hot an act to break up just yet. So I definitely put these two teams together to compete for the Raw tag belts. And then I think I've come up with a pretty interesting scenario for the SmackDown tag titles. The Usos have held those belts for a long time now, so I think it would be a good idea for them to move across all three brands over the next month or so and issue open challenges. They win all of those matches through underhanded tactics, and then on SmackDown they have a tag team summit where all teams from all three brands are invited, and the Usos just run them down, claiming to be the best team of all time. This leads to all other teams beating them down and giving them all their finishers. So then at Mania, you have a tri-branded tag team battle royal, either on the kickoff show of night 1, or maybe even on SmackDown, with the winners challenging the Usos on night 2 of Mania for the SmackDown tag team titles, which I would book as MSK moving up to the main roster. What better way to make your main roster debut than to win the SmackDown tag team titles at WrestleMania? So good an idea, in fact, that they probably won't do it. But that's what I would book anyway. Rounding out the card, I suppose they could throw a US title defense in there. Honestly, I haven't been all that impressed with Damian Priest's run thus far, and I'm thinking he will be dropping the title at Mania to either Omos or Austin Theory, probably the latter. So that's WrestleMania for you. Before I leave you, we have another submission in this week's personality profile. This one comes from Mike Liocci. Favorite band or musician? Bryan Adams, I'm assuming you mean the singer and not the wrestler, Mike. Queen and Phil Collins. Biggest thrill in life? Going to Montreal and seeing the Habs play twice and seeing Gabriel Iglesias at Casino Rama. Person you would most like to meet? Wayne Gretzky or Bret Hart, undoubtedly two of the best athletes of all time. Favorite sport besides wrestling? Hockey. Favorite athlete? Carey Price. Favorite TV show? He says he's got to go old school and pick Three's Company and The Big Bang Theory. I'll tell you something about The Big Bang Theory. The first few seasons were really great, I thought, but once they all got into relationships, I feel like the show kind of jumped the shark. Hobbies? Reading and watching older wrestling stuff and playing PS4. Favorite fast food? Pizza, he says. You know, I've always preferred Delissio to delivery for some reason. Favorite video game? NHL 21. Favorite cartoon character? Bugs Bunny. Favorite actor of all time? He says John Candy. Great one. Favorite actress? He says he doesn't have one. Favorite food? Pizza or rice with vegetables and shrimp or sausages? Well, why not both? Secret talent. He says he has an incredible memory. You and I both, Mike, and in fact, I remember our first interaction on the Law's MySpace page a while back. That's going back way to the 2005-2006 era. Crazy. Favorite movie of all time? He says Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. You know, I watched a movie recently that was almost identical to Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, although obviously not as good because Steve Martin, John Candy, you can't really compare. But I don't know if you've seen it, Mike. It was with Zach Galifianakis and Robert Downey Jr. It was called Due Date. So if you haven't seen it, I'd be curious to know your thoughts and possible comparisons. So that concludes another week. Join me next week, as this week I previewed the two shows, but next week I will be reviewing both the NXT Vengeance Day and WWE Elimination Chamber cards. I will also be talking about the season finale of Peacemaker coming up on Thursday, and possibly having an interview guest to discuss that. So stay tuned. But for now, I will leave you with an ABC.